Step into love like you've never been hurt before. Step into
Hello and welcome to Braveheart Conversations,
where we learn the art of love through brave and compassionate conversations. I am Jillian Landis.
and I'm Marie Wallace.
And we are your hosts today.
Step into love like you've never been hurt before.
Hello everyone, welcome to Braveheart Conversations. This is Jill Landis and I'm here with Marie Wallace.
Hello!
And we are going to be talking about a heavy subject today. We're going to be talking about intimidation and abuse. And so there might be some domestic violence conversation that comes up. So take that as a trigger warning for any of you that struggle with that kind of past or trauma triggers. So with that, let's
You may not be ready
jump
for that
in.
conversation.
Yeah. But this has been heavy on my heart. I've been really thinking a lot more about some of these tricky relationship scenarios. So I'm a relationship coach and I see a lot of different relationship struggles, and there's a big difference between a couple working on some things and working through some communication issues, and both people being willing and able to shift and change their behavior, not to conform to the other person, but to become a better version of themselves, when both people are invested in honoring themselves and other people. And that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about when maybe one person may be in that space, but the other person is not really interested in growing. They're more interested in power and control. And they're using another person as a victim. So I think Marie and I both have some experience in this area.
Unfortunately.
And Marie, you want to share a little bit about your experience with intimidation and abuse and where that line is?
Boy, where to start with that? I've had a past relationship where someone was watching my house and calling me on the phone and attacking me on the phone about the situation when they didn't really know what the scenario was. And what was funny about it is it's hard to believe right at the moment. Well, there's several examples. That was just the one that came up. But on that particular one, what I remember was staying on the phone for like 20, 30 minutes while this person's attacking me and saying all these terrible things about me and my character and who I am as a person. And fortunately, at the moment that this happened, I had a friend staying with me, and she's like, why don't you just hang up? Right? It seems so logical to everyone else. Why don't you just hang up? And I'm like, I can't do that. Some other value was conflicting in that, is hearing someone out. But that was in direct conflict with what was going on with me, and it was like, I can hang up. I mean, it was just one of those realizations that I had let that power and control over me for so long, not challenging authority, or in that particular case it felt like authority. And something as simple as hanging up the phone was intimidating me. Isn't that weird?
Yep. Yeah. I've totally been there. Was that after the relationship had ended? Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the dynamics during the relationship when things were maybe a little more under control, and how that looked for you.
It's just like a lot of digs, a lot of name calling, shaming, blaming. It looks like someone threatening to harm you physically, and they are so much stronger than I am, and so that's intimidating. Even just someone raising their voice, screaming and yelling at me, would shut me down to the point where I didn't feel like I could talk, because it just automatically happen. Some of that's coming from my childhood, of course, and I was very afraid of my father, but that yelling and screaming or the name calling just really crushing. And I would believe those things about myself. And then when it came to the physical violence part, and the one moment that I, just going to the other side of that, the one moment that helped me get out of that relationship was they had threatened to hit me, and they had already strangled me a little bit and threatened to hit me. And I just remember going, and I was afraid. I just remember feeling that because they were really drunk, and you don't know what happens, especially when someone's drunk and they're swinging their fists and you just know it's going to land. And then there was this shift in my brain at one point where I just went, okay. And you don't know when that moment will come, but I stood up and I held my face to him and I said, go ahead. And I don't know where that came from or anything except that I was just tired. And he said it threw him off because he was used to me backing down, being afraid, shaking, crying in that moment of control and power. And I wasn't. I was just really strong, held my face up and said, go ahead. And he goes, you'd like me to? And I go, actually, I would, because I felt at that moment that was the turning point in the relationship, that either I would be in the hospital or dead, and that's not a very good place to be, but I was just to that point of being done, or I'd be out. And it's just that intimidation was going on so long, and you don't realize how it starts small.
Yes.
And then it just builds and builds and builds until you find yourself in this fragile state going, gosh, I'm so much stronger than that.
Yeah.
Why am I tolerating this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it starts with subtle comments,
Digs.
Yeah. And things get really, like what you're talking about, really extreme and blown out of proportion. Like once you do stand up and you leave, like things get big. And then there is like the stalking stuff that happens and the long abusive phone calls or whatever. And those things don't necessarily happen in the relationship. Sometimes it's the smaller things. And you've heard me talk about conflict before. Conflict is, I think, really healthy.
Very healthy.
And like there's a couple things that are healthy catalysts for conflict. So I will often say, like, the healthy catalysts for conflict are courageous. So it's the boundary setting, speaking your truth, and being honest. Like, those things can cause some conflict and some discomfort. And then there's the shadow side, whereas it's more like avoidance is what's actually causing the conflict, or expectations, or the things that we're attached to,
things we don't say,
things we don't say often that cause conflict, and those create some really destructive kinds of conflict. But what we're talking about now is women, and sometimes men. I definitely don't want to make this a sexist issue where it's not men who are the abusers. Men are
I've
wonderful
heard of cases,
beings. I'm definitely not a man hater, and I think it's much worse in our for women to categorize men as being bad, as being stupid, as being abusive, as being narcissistic, as all these things. Like, it's a human condition. It's a human shadow.
It is.
It's not a male shadow.
I just think it happens more often that women are intimidated, mostly because of the physical size and strength of men.
Yeah.
But it very easily happens. I've seen it happen on both sides, where women were not honoring.
And women are abusive in much different ways. Women can be very manipulative, and we want our way just as much as men do. When we're in our shadow.
Not nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Women can certainly have their own stuff.
Do you have a situation that you want to share about?
Yeah, so I'd like to just talk about some of the subtleties that are in, when it's not majorly crazy usually when you're suppressing your truth and you're not making the choices to have those conflicts, those healthy conflicts, because you know how big it's going to be. You're intuitively, you know that when you open that box, it's going to be ugly. But I think that there's some subtleties that happen. It's just small compromises, things that you just don't think are a big deal. You know, might be your partner just saying, "Oh no, I don't want you to go out with that person," or "I don't want you to, you know, be out past 7," or you know, maybe you shouldn't.
You don't have to go to the gym.
Yeah, you don't need to go to the gym. Actually, I like bigger women. I've heard this one.
I've heard that,
and that's fine. Like, I think that it's great if you love your partner the way that they are, but I think that there's a different motive in that. I've seen this happen before, actually even in myself, you know, where a partner will sabotage someone's fitness goals or their nutrition.
Because if they look too pretty, they'll leave me.
Right. And it's a really icky motivation.
Yeah, it is.
It's not that I just love you unconditionally. It's sabotaging someone's vision, someone's goals, and their, you know, desire to be healthy. I've seen also, you know, men say, "Well, I don't really want you to wear makeup." And it's just this ownership that gets really icky. There's a difference between somebody who's a really committed partner and loyal, and somebody who is possessive and really intent on owning you and only having, you know, nobody else can see you, nobody else can experience you, and it's this very fear-based. I think it all comes from worthiness. So on the men's part, I see that motive as I'm not lovable.
Right, I
so
can see that.
I need to make sure I keep this person only around me because I'll lose them, because then they'll see, you know, somebody else and they'll love
Trade
them
me.
instead of me.
Yeah.
And I also saw some of that manipulation power tactic in, you know, I had an experience where for a couple of years I was really intent on paying off my debt. And I was super tight. I was so dedicated. And I paid off $30,000 of debt in 3 years.
Go girl.
And it felt very empowering. And I remember at the time when I paid this debt off, the comment that was made to me was, well, right as I was coming to the end of that, "Well, now you're not going to need me anymore." And I think, and it's not just guys again, but I think sometimes partners can have this worthiness issue where it's like, well, if you need this aspect of me, maybe it's money. If you need my money, then you have to love me.
Financial security is a big way to hold people down.
Totally. And then, you know, subconsciously, then they're sabotaging your success as well, because they really deep down don't want you to have that success, because they want you to need them, ultimately because they don't feel lovable.
Exactly.
And this is why we all get to do our work. We all get to do our shadow stuff, because any of that unworthiness crap will come out on our partner or anybody else around us.
Sure.
It deeply impacts other people when we think that we aren't valuable, because then we do set up these manipulative contracts, because that's what it is. And I see this pattern even in my own life. I've chosen partners who didn't have their stuff together. So then, like, if they needed me, then that would mean they owed me staying with me, right?
Well, and if you can broaden it past you know, partner relationships, because that happens in work relationships and other, you know, family relationships. You can see that
friendships. If you see a pattern of, you know, attracting people into your life that you have to constantly be caring for them and you're constantly giving, that's definitely
or you can't have
flag.
other friends. I've seen that too. Where
Yeah.
you can't have another friend because you're my friend.
Yeah, that whole ownership thing that can definitely expand beyond romance. That can be a friendship thing as well. I don't want you spending time with other people. You feel that competitive energy.
Yeah.
And then the subtle intimidation, I think, that goes on too. Just small little comments that remind you of their power.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever those little comments are that remind you.
It's okay, you're not that smart. It's okay. Or, girls don't do math and science, those kind of comments.
Or who do you think you are?
Yeah, who do you think you are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty big dream. Might be getting a little too big for your britches.
Mm-hmm. I've heard those.
Or, just accentuating their own power, their own talents. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I like that because I haven't thought of that. Accentuating their own power is just a real subtle way of you feeling
Smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or even being overly helpful. And this can happen too, like having struggled with codependency, I totally know that this can be a sticking point where if I'm constantly helping, I'm stealing somebody else's dignity.
Mm-hmm.
But if our partner is constantly helping us, that can also be a way of control.
Mm-hmm.
And I can call that out because I've done it.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
So, yeah, when I'm constantly helping someone achieve a goal or whatever they're wanting to do, then that can easily be something that I'm really sending the
You're
message
disempowering
that
them.
you can't do this, so let me help you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sometimes it's much more dignifying to step back and say, I know you got this.
Mm-hmm. And I think we don't really mean to sometimes because helping is in our nature. And I just think sometimes we overly help,
Yep.
really wanting to be needed, wanting to feel that what we're doing is important to the other person as well. So I think there's a lot of good intentions sometimes behind the helping.
Yep.
And then we forget, like you said, that we could be stealing someone else's dignity when they can. I mean, I've been guilty of that, going, oh, you just don't know where the balance is sometimes.
Yes, totally. But I think it's definitely an opportunity to step back and say, what are my motives here? Is this coming from a place of unworthiness where I'm just trying to gain some worthiness from helping somebody else? And is that really serving me or them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and even asking the other person, am I doing too much?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, it could be if there was a conversation. I'm just thinking in situations where people are doing caregiving. I think sometimes we think that we're helping and then we realize that we might be doing too much.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes if that's a really intimate relationship, it's better to just delegate that to a third party so that there isn't any of that.
For reals.
Yeah. Yep. That's hard stuff. Yeah, so subtle intimidation, manipulation. I want to talk a little bit also about gaslighting.
Okay.
So gaslighting is when somebody acts like you're crazy, right? So you're stating a truth and there's complete denial. Not only just denial, but how could you think that? Or, you're so stupid for thinking that.
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about? And it really just cuts people off at the knees. And then, I've seen a lot of people and experienced myself where then you really do start to question, am I crazy? Like, is it, maybe they're right. And this is where it's very important to have supportive people around you as well to kind of remind you of reality. And remind you that you're not crazy. Remind you that you're actually really smart, intelligent person, and your intuition's very strong, and you get to trust it. It's all
so important.
Yeah.
Support in that situation is really just having someone to talk to and call it.
Yeah.
You say, this is what I'm experiencing in myself. Let me know what are you experiencing, and this is some feedback that I've gotten. What do you think about it? Just always having that, like, it's almost like a third party as well in that situation.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very important to have a solid support group. That's another thing that abusers will often do is isolate.
isolate's a big one.
They're victims, and so that becomes, really, really challenging. That certainly happened in my first relationship. That was very difficult for me to face that relationship and how toxic it had become. It was much harder to leave because I had very little support. By the end, I had gained quite a bit of support in Al-Anon, but it was challenging. I felt really alone. And it's very important for those relationships to be neutral, and in a space where there's no judgment around whether or not you stay or leave. And that was super key for me, knowing people in Al-Anon who didn't judge me whether or not it was my time to go or not. And there was really no advice given.
That's the most important part, because you need people that will honor whatever decisions you make, and no judgment. And that's sometimes hard, but it's their journey, their experience. And if we do give advice that's not warranted or needed or asked for, it's putting them in a place of blame and shame, and why aren't I at that level of leaving yet? How come I can't leave? And what's wrong with me? Going back to, then we intimidate ourselves. Yeah, there's so much that's going on the flip side. And I think after someone is out of a situation, it's easy to look back and go, damn, what was I thinking? But in it, the flags were waving really big.
But there's so much fear there, because they do a really good job of creating this sense of power. Like, if you use your voice, if you stand up, if you whatever, you're gonna be crushed.
Do this dream and fail, you won't come back. You won't come back from that.
And some of those things are just outright said. Those things were said to me, I will crush you. So, and those things, if you receive them enough times, they really sink in. So
again, why you need the supports, because then you have cheerleaders going, no, that's not true. That's not true. And people who know the core of you.
I'm so grateful for the coaches and mentors today, that when I do, because I still am dealing with some of that intimidation now, and maybe we should talk to you about, like, there's the subtle side when you're in the relationship, and then there's the really overt, nasty stuff that happens after, when they're losing control, and
so they have to ante up.
They're losing that control, and they really want it back, and they'll go to extreme measures. And I really am in a space of honoring so many of the women that have come before me and have spoken up, even though, like, that may mean they're ridiculed for it. People, all the women that have stood up, and then they're judged with, well, what were you wearing? Or were you at this party? What did you expect when you went to this location? Or what, So I think having to deal with some of that blame is really difficult. And that hinders a lot of women from ever speaking up, from ever using their voice. So, I have a lot of honor for those that have fought for justice and have used their voice despite whatever the consequences might be. I think a lot of women are blamed for, they want to pay off, they want money. But no, that takes, like, some intense courage to stand up and say, this is what happened to me. And even though I know that the court may not side with me, and I may not have the evidence I need, and this person is powerful or whatever, like, they've still stood their ground, and they've still
stood in their own integrity. I want to back up just a tiny bit, if it's okay, and talk about the now what, because there have been people in that situation of intimidation, and how do I not get in that situation again? And I think that's where you and I've talked about fair fighting rules too.
Yeah.
Is in your experience when you've been intimidated, what are those things that have come up that are non-negotiable for you now?
Yes.
And be really thoughtful about what is it that you want in a relationship, and that could be any relationship, because what I'm tolerating in this closer, intimate relationship, I'm probably tolerating in other relationships too. They just may not wave as big because it's not as close. But one of the things, like for me, and you probably have your own, like for me, it's no yelling, because I shut down. And it doesn't allow me to be a participant in the conversation. So the yelling would be one. The other is no name calling, because name calling dishonors someone too. It's blame and shame, and we hold this label. I mean, it sounds silly that we allow that label to mean anything, but if I'm not allowed to be called anything or used with that tone, then I can honor myself in that. And there's a host of other fair fighting rules as well, but just something that says, okay, I've tolerated that in the past, and now I want to experience a more meaningful relationship that honors me, and in that relationship, I honor myself.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is interesting. I am acutely aware of what I don't want, because I've experienced it. One helpful conversation that I had with my coach just this week, we talked about relationship green flags, which I had heard before, but it was very helpful to hear again. And so I'll share a couple of these now. What do I want?
Yes.
Not what I don't want. So relationship green flags would be someone that supports your personal growth.
Exactly.
Right? So they're not threatened by you doing a bodybuilding competition
No. Or
making
getting more money than them.
Or making some big business decisions. Practices their own self-care. Is self-reflective. Has long-standing friendships. Is empathetic. Is vulnerable. Is spiritual. Is self-sufficient.
I think that's a really key.
That's really important. Has healthy hobbies.
Yes.
Communicates openly. Honors boundaries. And is self-responsible.
I like that. I think self-growing too is helpful. And I think you said something that addressed that, because then you're both growing.
Yeah.
And it's not a competition,
Right.
and it's not fighting for power. It's both, just being human beings.
Yeah. And
I like
for
this.
me, I love the energy of focusing more on the things that I want more of.
Agreed.
Instead of, I've experienced a lot of the things that I don't want. And the more I focus on that, the more I'll just call that into my space again.
I agree with that. I do think, though, at some point to be aware of those things that I don't want as well.
Oh, sure.
But I totally agree 1,000% on having the focus on what I do want, which goes back to the list.
It does. And like when I'm looking at the green flags, I can't say yes to some of these if there's a red flag. Does that make sense? So this still addresses some of the do not wants.
It does. Because, you'll see there's a conflict.
Yeah, totally. So, this has been a great conversation.
Love it.
I'm grateful that we're able to talk about some really sticky, vulnerable situations. I love all you brave people out there who are willing to have these conversations and maybe take a few nuggets to examine your own world, your own life, and maybe share some of those thoughts with us as well.
And the more courageous you become, the more you empower others. So
truly. So we want to hear your story. I'm going to share my story courageously. Marie continues to share her story courageously, and we want to hear yours. So if you would be happy, we would be happy to hear from you if you want to reach out to us through email. My email is defytheaverage@gmail.com, and Marie
is marie@mariesgold.com.
And
or if you have questions or things you'd like us to talk about as well.
Yep, we're totally open to addressing any scenarios that you might have over the show. That might be really fun. So if you are in a place that you're willing to be exposed that way, that may help a lot of people. So we love you very much.
Yes.
And we will speak
Proud
with
of you too.
Yeah, so proud. These are hard conversations and definitely hard things to integrate. So we will talk with you.
Like you've never been burned before. Would you just open